Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining me today as we talk about a topic that, as a psychologist, of course, has a very natural interest, that of self-awareness. Um, Now, in our presentation today, just a bit of housekeeping first. The presentation is going to be recorded and everyone will be sent a copy of the slides afterwards. Um, so please don't feel like you need to scramble and take notes unless anything really kind of jumps out for you. The materials that you see here today, we will certainly share with you after the presentation. But as a part of what we're looking at today, self-awareness, what I'd like to do is almost engage us in some of that process of what does it actually mean to be self-aware. And we're going to cover a couple different things. The first topic is really going to be, why does self-awareness actually matter? We're talking about it. Why should we talk about it? Does it actually make any sense? What's the benefit of it? The second thing we're then going to shift to is, if we want to gain this greater level of self-awareness, how do we actually go about doing so? What are some of the steps that we can take as individuals for ourselves or for the people that we work with if we're in that developmental professional space to help them increase that self-awareness? And then what we're going to try today is also just kind of apply that to three topics through the lens of ourselves as well. We'll look a little bit at communication, change, and leadership, and how the use of a model for understanding people allows us to kind of break down these broad, sometimes very complex topics and issues to allow us to bring a level of self-awareness that then results in better communication, allowing us to manage change more effectively, and for those of us in leadership roles to be better leaders. So the first place to really start with is when we think about self-awareness, we notice it most often when it's other people who don't actually have it, don't we? Those individuals that come into a room and either the things that they say or the things that we do, we feel like there's a miss, that the impact they're having on us is probably not what they meant to, and they're not actually aware of it. So it is one of life's ironies that sometimes recognizing and being aware of our own awareness is more difficult than recognizing when other people aren't aware of things, of how things are going. So think of those meetings where someone shows up and they never stop talking. Or those other meetings where someone never talks, but then as soon as you leave, they kind of corner you and they want to chat with you and may not be reading very well the time and the place for when they should have those interactions. Every time I think of self-awareness, one individual really quickly springs to mind, and this was a leader that I worked with about 10 years ago. This individual was incredibly smart, worked in a very technical, highly technical space, and his approach was, if he was right technically, then it didn't matter how else he communicated or interacted with other people. And this dying on the mountain of being technically right did result in him burning a lot of bridges with the people that he worked with and the individuals around him, and really limited his ability then to move forward in his career beyond just being a technical expertise, and had no awareness that the way that he was interacting with people was actually causing more obstacles for him. And so that brings up this idea of like self-awareness becoming a truly critical and important thing. So where I'd like to start, let's get a clear definition of what we actually mean by self-awareness. Here we have the ability to reflect on and assess your own behavior and skills and the impact they have on others. So self-awareness is not just a understanding of self, it is a recognition of how does that then impact the people and the environment that you're engaged with. And it's making that combination then that becomes very important of self-awareness. It is really this reflection on self and reflection on the impact of others. So when we look at self-awareness then, we can kind of separate it into these two areas. There are the intentions that we have, the motivations, the desires, the reasons for why we're doing what we're doing. And then there's the impact, how those behaviors motivations, desires actually show up, how they appear towards other people. And to be truly self-aware then requires people to reflect on both their intentions, a clear understanding of what am I trying to do, what is my motivation, what are my desires, but then also a reflection on how is that impacting other people. So the more self-aware we are, the more self-aware others are, the closer these two circles of intentions and impact actually come together. Ideally, we have a very high level of overlap between the two, that what we want to do and hope to accomplish actually has that impact on the people who are around us. And of course, as I mentioned, we generally notice self-awareness more often when it's not there, as these two circles of intentions and impact, as they diverge from each other, we have what we would often call an awareness gap, where the things that we're doing are not actually having the impact that we'd actually hope to. And that actually then becomes a problem. Because when we can see ourselves clearly, when we can align our intentions with our impact quite closely, there are significant benefits. So the first thing, and every one of these well supported in research, we've known these things for 30 plus years already. But self-aware people, those whose intentions align with impact, they are more confident. They're more creative. They make better decisions. They build stronger relationships. They communicate more effectively. They're better workers. They get more promotions. And they're more effective leaders who have more satisfied employees and who have more profitable companies. So there is a huge value to everyone for increasing our self-awareness, and it ranges from completion of tasks to connecting with people and building relationships to advancing our careers in creative and more enjoyable ways. So the why does self-awareness matter is because it impacts so many aspects of our lives. Really, it becomes a bit of a no-brainer of why people should focus on and look for ways to increase their self-awareness. Now, I'm sure most of us know that our negative interactions are much more impactful than our positive ones. We could do 10 positive ones, but that one negative one is what's going to stick for people's mind. And self-awareness is that avenue then for individuals to start to identify, how do we eliminate some of the downsides? How do we eliminate some of those negative impacts and then continue to leverage the strength of what we might do naturally? So taking time to focus on self-awareness is not necessarily just a fun thing to do that some people might benefit from. It is incredibly important, and all people working with others would benefit from that reflection on what are my intentions and a reflection on what is the impact that I might be having on other people. So if the why is because it matters a lot, the next question then is, well, how do we actually do that? What approach could we take that allows us to realistically begin to increase our self-awareness, which does require that understanding of us and an understanding of others? Because one of the things we know, we are not all alike. We're very different, and I'm sure you have people that are around you. Maybe they're in your office today, they're at home, they're certainly in your family, where there are things that you will like to do that they will not like to do, and vice versa. So what becomes very helpful for us is to have a model, a way to evaluate who we are and the impact we have on others in an empathizing and understanding way that allows us to kind of connect that intention, the intentions we have, with the impact we have on other people. And really, in essence, we're going to look at the MBTI model today because it provides a wonderful way for us to think about and plan our interactions with others, and then also reflect and learn from previous interactions we have. So maintaining self-awareness is an activity of reflection, but it is a reflecting forward and also a reflecting of the past. And that is how we can continue to tie in that intentions and impacts and make that overlap between those two circles as small as possible. Now, the MBTI model, what it provides for us in many ways is a shortcut and an organizer, a way for us to quickly discover aspects of us, who we are, and then also understand others, and then organize that and utilize that information in these new discoveries in a way that allow us to, in many ways, connect better with people. So what I'd like to start with is just a first poll question for everyone that I'm going to share. And just curious, how many people have actually completed an assessment for themselves that really was focused on helping you learn a little bit about yourself? We'll just let the poll go here for a little while longer to collect some responses. Okay, so now I'm just going to share these results, and what we can see, 87% of us here today have taken an assessment in the past um, to help us learn a little bit about ourselves, focus on this self-understanding. Now, I'm also curious then for one more poll to look at how many of you have actually done an assessment in your organization or know that your organization uses assessment tools in their workspace in that area of employee development. Okay. So we do see an interesting thing, and this is a common drop-off when we have developmental professionals. We all like to eat our own cookie, and we're quite interested and excited about how could we learn more about ourselves. Um, that's part of a natural draw for many people who work in the development space. But we can then see as we go towards organizations, there is a significant drop-off where we go from high 80% of individuals here today who've done assessments to learn about themselves, all the way down to 57% for organizations. So there's a significant gap there. And what's always interesting to me is these organizations who have not yet made that link between the importance of self-awareness to making better decisions, being more creative, all of the other benefits that we initially discussed when we talked about the why. So let's look at then this next section on how and the MBTI model. So for many of you, you're probably quite familiar with this. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is based on a model that looks at four broad kind of preference dichotomies or differences between individuals. The first one, extroversion, introversion, by far and away, probably the most common dichotomy that we think about or know about, which really relates to how do people direct and receive their energy. Extroverts get their energy from the world around them. Introverts get their energy from reflecting and thinking about things. Our second dichotomy, sensing or intuition, then, are two different ways that we take in information. Sensing looks for concrete, realistic facts, and intuition looks for patterns and meaning. The third one, thinking or feeling, then looks at how do people like to make decisions? How do they come to conclusions with the information that they've gathered? People with a preference for thinking or feeling, they like to make decisions in a pro-con, objective type of manner. People with a preference for feeling like to make decisions by weighing what important values are going to actually come into play. And then last but not least, we have judging or perceiving. Two different ways that people approach their outer world. And those with a preference for judging like to have things scheduled and decided. And people with a preference for perceiving like to keep things open and allow them to gather information. Of course, then, for each of us, based on our preferences, we will land in one of 16 personality types. And these personality types become starting points, areas that allow us to begin that first step of reflection of what is that natural motivation, that internal intention, the desire of what we're trying to accomplish. And that becomes the building block then for us to leap on to say, and how might that then impact people a little bit differently? Now, what I want to do today for us to kind of play with this model a little bit is try a couple things out. We're going to start the first one with communication. So as you look at these two words, macro or micro, I would like you just to make a quick note for yourself. Which one of those words do you prefer, or which one of those two words do you think describes you best? So macro, micro, just pick one. And then I'd also like you to pick which of these two words do you prefer or describes you best, heart or mind. So macro, micro, heart or mind. And if you can remember for yourself, is it macro or micro? And is it heart or mind? What we can do is apply these then to 4 different styles of communication. So for example, people who would have picked macro and hearts from kind of a starting point, their broad communication style contains information about these are the things we see worth striving for. We hear language around empowerment and the possibilities for people. They naturally give encouragement and they speak to what is the long-term impact on individuals. Our second style that comes from our very brief and invalid and unreliable questionnaire that we've just done is those who would have chosen macro and minds. Now, these individuals, what they tend to speak about are theoretical concepts. They're focused on how can we master things? What are the possibilities for systems and how can we make them better? And what's the best strategy then for us to move forward with that? Then we shift on to our micro and hearts categories. These are individuals, their communication tends to be focused on internal and external customer service. And by that, I mean, how can we help other people? What support do they actually need? Who's going to be doing things? How are they going to be doing them? And who are going to be affected by the tasks that are actually being completed? And then finally, we have individuals here who would have selected micro and then minds. And these are individuals whose natural focus is a little bit more on efficiency. And what are the effective policies and procedures that allow us to best address the bottom line? And they will really narrow in on how things are going to be done, and they might talk about how much things will cost. Now, as you look at these 4 styles, every one of them speaks to important things. However, given your style, you may speak to the ones underneath that category for yourself more than some of the others, and at times you might even miss some of the other ones. And the challenge is, for example, if I'm someone who has macro and hearts as my style, I might not be communicating the right type of information to persuade other individuals or help them understand where I am coming from. Now, from the MBTI model, this actually uses a very simple way of looking at sensing and intuition and thinking and feeling. Now, for us to actually be effective communicators, what we need to do is speak to all 4 of those things. Now, for each of us, we'll speak to 2. It'll be macro or micro, hearts or minds, but we are all capable of actually addressing all 4 of these. So for someone to communicate effectively, they need to speak to the macro, the big picture, the global situation that explains why things need to happen, speak about the overall plan and the flow. But we also then need to speak to the micro, the specific data of what's not working, how maybe the change we're proposing is going to respond to that. We need to speak to the how and when and who in a very explicit way, in a very specific way. We also then need to speak to hearts. What are the values that are driving these plans? What's the discussion around the values at play, the people who are going to be impacted? What are the needs of individuals as we go about doing our work? And then finally, we need to speak to minds. What is the logic behind the changes? What are the alternatives that have been considered? What are the pros and the cons? What critique might there be of the decisions that have actually been made? So for us to communicate effectively, as we leave here, even today, if you're going to have a meeting here this afternoon, before you go into that meeting, if you need to share some information, I would just like you to take some time, if you can, to think, am I speaking to macro? Am I speaking to micro? Am I speaking to hearts? And am I speaking to minds? By doing so, you will give the information and the type of evaluation that members of your audience are actually looking for. And they will say, I'm hearing things that are important to me. And that will then increase the alignment between your intentions and the impact you actually have. Now let's quickly shift to change. So once again, looking in the concept of change at these two words, task or people. What do you prefer? Which one might describe you best? And then our second one, scheduled or flexible. Which word do you prefer? Which one might describe you best? And if we look at our 4 change styles then, our first group of task and scheduled, well, surprise, surprise, they tend to be analytical and decisive. They like to take clear positions. They like to organize people and resources to get things done. That becomes that internal motivation and intention. However, at times it can come across as rushed, that these individuals are making decisions too quickly and they're not considering the impact of those decisions on others. Our second group of people who would have selected the words task and flexible, they tend to be very curious and somewhat skeptical. They like information and considering ideas, and they tend to be very adaptable to change. They can be hands-off, and because they want to empower others. So whatever makes best for other people, they're quite willing to let them go ahead and do that. The downside of that style, though, is they may not give enough direction to others, and because they're so interested in possibilities, they may put off decisions for too long. Our third group of people, when it comes to change, those who would have picked people and flexible, tend to be warm and adaptable, very focused on supporting individuals, both their needs and their approach to work, and they also like to gather a lot of information. The challenge for them, because they're so flexible and adjustable to the needs of individuals, is they can change direction a lot and sometimes too quickly. And they might then resist some of those structures and processes that get implemented during times of change because they feel that can hem them in a little bit too much. And then our fourth style, those who are selected people and scheduled. They tend to be warm and friendly, but decisive. They want to push forward on accomplishing what the group's mission might be. They're very then willing to quickly gather information from people. How that can come across sometimes, though, is putting off tough decisions because they want to keep most people happy and look to generate a lot of consensus, and might focus on relationships to the detriment of task completion. These change styles come from a combination of looking at a thinking-feeling preference or a judging-perceiving preference. All of them bring very important things to this concept of change, but if they do not flex enough, they can miss things. And we know effective change, we need to actually focus on what are the tasks that need to be addressed, what are the pros and cons, who are the people involved, what's the impact on them, how does that connect with our organizational values, what things do we actually need to schedule and plan out to make sure that the change moves forward, and also what do we need to be flexible with? Where do we need to keep our options open? So as new evidence and new information emerges, we can actually pivot along with it. Effective change requires all four of these things. Each of us will naturally do too. And then let's take one last look at the broad concept of leadership. So what word describes you best? Imaginative or factual? Logical or compassionate? So if you picked imaginative and logical, the natural starting point for these leaders is asking, what else can we do? They like to look for new ways to complete things. They're attracted to the new and the novel. Um, and really, the reason for that is, how can we change things to make them better? Now, the potential downside of that style is that it can come across lacking consideration of other people. Because it is focused on ideas and tasks, it may sometimes miss who are the people involved, what might they need, and how does that align with their values. If you picked imaginative and compassionate, the driving force for these leaders is wanting to make a difference. They're very focused on the big picture and on the future, and they really like to put their energy and attention into ideas that allow them to empower people to be better. It's probably no surprise that the vast majority of individuals in the development space land here. That how can we help people realize their full potential? How do we help them grow in the future? The downside is sometimes it can be a little bit unrealistic or almost overly optimistic, that we can not necessarily recognize how difficult sometimes things can be, and how many challenges people might face in our looking at the potential for individuals. Our third group of leaders, if you picked factual and logical, their natural focus is on let's get things done. What's the task at hand? Let's get in and do it, and let's do it right the first time. Um, there is an energy and activity to these styles, but it is very focused on what is the job. And as a result, it too can come across as lacking appreciation for people who are actually getting those jobs done. And then our fourth style, if you picked factual and compassionate, um, the driving focus is how can you help people? These leaders tend to be very supportive and very practical. And as a result of that, they really like to search out for how can they help and support people getting things done in the here and now. So they have a very natural focus on supporting people in their day-to-day work. Um, at times, though, these leaders can come across as less open to new ideas or changing things in their willingness to kind of keep things working for people so well in the present. They might sometimes come across as not considering the future. Now, all of these then, when you look at the minuses, they are what it appears. This is the impact that they can have. It is not necessarily the intention of these styles. But that gap there, when it exists, is a self-awareness gap, and that becomes a challenge. For effective leaders, what they need to consider are what are some of the ideas? What are the future needs? What are some of the patterns we see? What are the facts as well of our present environment that we're working on, the realistic constraints that we're actually facing? As we make decisions, what is logic dictating in terms of the pros and cons and the objective reasoning for what we should do? And then fourth, what values are at play? What is the organization's mission? How does the things that you're doing as a leader align with those values? And what is the impact on the people that you are working with, that report to you, or that you report to? And effective leadership then speaks to and connects with all of those things. So self-awareness matters if, well, self-awareness matters if you want to realize your full potential, you want others to help realize their full potential, You want to get the best out of people. You want to get the best when you're interacting with people. Um, the benefits of self-awareness and improving it are substantial. Um, we've just looked very quickly at how that could be done for communication and change and leadership and a host of other issues. Um, Assessments such as the MBTI, based around that model of understanding others, in essence, they become a shortcut. They help us speed up that self-awareness. They give us a path for helping understand what our intentions might be and how they could have a potential different impact on others than we had hoped. So what I'm hoping to kind of encourage everyone here to walk away with is how you go about generating self-awareness is not as important as the fact that you do. And an assessment tool like the MBTI becomes a very nice way for us to, one, look at the differences between people, allow us then to kind of plan for and reflect on our interactions with them beforehand, but then also review the interactions that we've had to see how could we do better, how might we improve in the future. So this concept of self-awareness is always one of reflection forward and reflection backward. Um, and it does take some effort, obviously, but the benefits of it are incredibly diverse. There's quite a breadth of them, and there's quite a depth to them as well. And so what I speak to people a lot of the time is self-awareness matters in so many different things. Um, in our personal lives, in our work lives, in how we go about doing tasks, and honestly, even in how we feel about ourselves. So what I would like to do now is open up an opportunity for people to ask some questions. I know we have just scratched the surface here on this concept of self-awareness. Um, and I'm hoping that as you kind of either continue a journey that you're on in your personal exploration or in your work with others, that this drive towards self-awareness becomes um, a goal for you and a goal for other people, given how important it actually is. So are there any questions? There is a question panel on the side. Feel free to please type in any of them in. And what I'll do is I'll just scroll quickly through here and answer a few of them before we sign off. Um, and then, of course, our recording for the webinar will be sent out to anyone after the fact. If you would like to connect with me, um, you have further questions you'd like to ask, but you want to take them offline, please reach out to me either via email, connect with me via LinkedIn. I love talking about this stuff, and I actually enjoy conversations much more than I do webinars where I feel like I'm speaking into a little bit of a black box. So please feel free to reach out to me. Let's just see. I will be presenting on here we go. How do we implement what we learn through self-awareness assessments in an organizational setting? Well, there's two fantastic ways to do that. The first is from a personal standpoint of as you go about doing your own work, how might what you learn about yourself in terms of self-awareness that you've gained, how might you then apply that to some of the individual things that you do? The other thing is when you're then working with groups of people, for example, the question then becomes, as a group, how do we take this awareness of everyone and use that to adjust how we actually make decisions, share information, and approach our tasks? Self-awareness really becomes one of the critical things for helping groups best utilize diversity. Um, because the more aware we are of ourselves and the impact we have on others, the better we can connect with people, the more we assume positive intent from others, and that just pays dividends in spades in terms of people coming together with different ideas and in many ways sharing perspectives and building better things. Some resources that I would suggest for improving self-awareness. Well, obviously, one of them would be complete something like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. What does that tell you about your natural approach and the things that you look at and you might actually naturally do? Um, there is another great book that I have recommended forever about how people make decisions. And I think it's a wonderful way for us to look at some of the natural biases we have, and that's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It came out a while ago, incredibly popular. You'll be able to find it right away, but a wonderful book for starting off. What are effective ways to help others become more self-aware in a compassionate manner? Um, well, it's very interesting. People do say they always want feedback, but then when you give them feedback, they can kind of resist to it. I think a great step is always to ask, um, I've got some ideas or some feedback that I might want to share. When would I best give that to you? Um, Catching people in the moment often means you catch people unaware. But taking some time out later is probably an easier way to get people to be a little bit more approachable. Um, and then ask them, would you like the feedback? Most people will say yes. And then once they get the feedback, they have said yes. So there becomes a little bit of an internal mental trick that opens them up a little bit more towards accepting it. Um, but it's not necessarily easy. And I would say in many organizations, we have leaders that need to go more towards the compassionate, consider others side than we do go towards the focus more on tasks and getting things done. Another great question, do we think a person's MBTI will change over time? And is it worth retaking the MBTI? Um, well, according to Jung's theory, who we are doesn't change in terms of our preferences, but how we act and our behavioral repertoire certainly does change over time. For Jung, that was what he described as wisdom and maturing, that we become more flexible and better able to deal with our environment based on the needs of the environment rather than just reacting out of what our preferences are. Um, so the value of retaking the MBTI is seeing, are there any times where potential growth has shown up? The step 2 report, of course, is wonderful for this because it looks at those 4 preferences and it breaks them down into 5 facets each. So it allows us to take much more of a nuanced look at where might we have started from as our natural preferences, but where have we grown towards in terms of the behavior that we've taken on, the ways that we become more flexible as we mature in life. And I think that's a very important thing about the MBTI that sometimes gets missed is that that 4-letter type is a starting point for you. It's not meant to be the thing that locks you in. Instead, it's how do you grow from those 4 letters into a much more well-rounded, flexible, adaptable individual to the people and the things that you ended up interacting with over the course of your life. With breakaway groups with employees teams during a workshop, what additional questions do you recommend asking to help others become more self-aware? Um, it's a great question. Um, so first thing I always would ask is, how do you think that might look like to other people? It's surprising how infrequently people actually consider that. Um, with groups themselves, um, what I ask them to do is with a group, for example, if you're doing an MBTI type activity, you might have extroverts and introverts separate, and you can ask them those questions of how do we work best, but how might that come across towards other people? How do we think they might actually see us? And that within a group, of course, allows them to start kind of brainstorming some ideas of how they might look like or come across to others. And that becomes a nice little way for them to start getting some ideas. You then bring the groups back together and you actually have them check it. So for the introverts to say, how do we think extroverts might see us? You can then ask the extrovert group, is that how you see them? Is there some areas of fit or are there some areas of miss? And if the group's a very positive one, it becomes a very, at times, quite fun and engaging activity for helping people reflect on who they are and how that group works together. The name of the book, again, for everyone is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Um, It's a white book. It's got a picture of a yellow pencil on it. So you can tell I have a preference for intuition. Those are kind of the vague things that have stood out for me. And it came out a number of years ago, but it's a wonderful book for thinking about the biases we have as individuals, both in working with others and then also working our way through information. So what's the cost to organizations of not having team members that are self-aware? What, well, in many ways, they're huge because if we've got organizations with poor leaders who aren't getting things done properly, they're making bad decisions. I mean, I don't think there would be any way for us to actually add them up, but the cumulative effect of them is astronomical. Um, where we probably see the biggest gap right now are those individuals moving from independent contributors to first-time leaders. It's a difficult shift as you move from doing your own work to organizing and managing other people. And mistakes made at that space have a very detrimental effect to organizations because that impacts so many people, and they're really at that kind of cross section of where an organization's strategy and tactics meet. And when that's not working well in organizations, it becomes very, very difficult. Um, so we've seen a lot of them now targeting that level of leader for increasing their self-awareness just because the benefits and the payback are so significant. Another question, any thoughts on 360 usage in self-awareness development? Yeah, I think really that becomes a great next step for self-awareness. I think tools like the MBTI give you a good understanding of that first part of self and what your intentions might be. Um, a 360 assessment really then focuses on what's the impact you might be having on other people. So as a developmental step, 360 assessments are fantastic for self-awareness. Um, if you're looking to use 360 assessment tools, just make sure that you push it in terms of the objectives and the goals as a developmental activity. There can be some significant hesitation around 360s if people feel that it's meant as a performance management or evaluation tool. Um, and so that's why for organizations looking to use them, um, communicate, 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 and be clear about your goals with it goes a long way for getting people on board. And then when you have people on board, of course, it becomes a fantastic feedback process for helping people kind of close that gap between intentions and impact. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time here today. I know there are some other questions yet that I'll scroll through, and what I'll do is I'll respond to them in an email and send that out to everyone along with the slide deck. So if I haven't addressed your question, I will get to it, and we'll have that out to you later this week. So thanks again for joining me. I appreciate your energy and attention here today. Would love to connect with any and all of you again in the future. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email. Um, and until then, I hope you have an enjoyable rest of your day and best of luck in your ongoing work with others. Take care.